Well, this is a unique day for me to have to follow a slam poet, especially coming from the Tuck School. But most of the time I speak with economists who are basically engaged in equations and barely know how to speak at all. So what I'd like to do is, from the beginning, apologize for my lack of poetry, and I'd also like to let you know that I've done many speeches about topics in my books, but today I'm going to do the very first talk about a book that I'm writing right now, and I've been working on for the last couple of weeks. And I think I was invited to come and talk to you about something that you may not realize is going on today, and that is what I call the capitalist Cold War. We've all heard of the communist Cold War, in which capitalism defeated communism. But today, we see a new kind of world happening in which there are varieties of capitalism that are competing with each other. We're watching capitalism evolve at a rate of speed that we've never seen before, and we are watching forms of capitalism rise and fall. We're so used to thinking about competition as being between corporations and other corporations around the world that we don't think about what's behind it, which is how is the system of capitalism in one country better than another. So, for example, the American tradition for centuries has been laissez-faire capitalism. It was the form of capitalism that involved free markets and deregulation and open trade and small government. It was the form of capitalism that made America great during the 19th century and defeated defeated communism in the 20th century. But today we're facing two other kinds of capitalism as competitors. The rise of the European form of capitalism called social capitalism. This is a bit like American capitalism, but with socialism laid on top. Suddenly, people had Christian values and decided to take money away from the rich, give to the poor. We started adopting that form over a number of years, starting with FDR and moving all the way to Obama with his current health care plans. The third type of capitalism, though, that is producing the most disruption in the world is managed capitalism. Former communists and heavy socialist countries that have managed to find a way to decentralize markets and human behavior in the business realm, but keep central control over industrial policy and other kinds of policies that are undermining the laissez-faire politics and the social market politics of the West. And the process of the evolution and competition between these different types of capitalism is speeding up. So to give you an example, the lifestyle of the ancient Romans around the time of Augustus in the 1st century AD wasn't replicated again until the mid-1800s by the British, who worked with mercantile capitalism and the First Industrial Revolution. Now, the First Industrial Revolution produced a 250% increase in the per capita income of the world in 100 years. The Second Industrial Revolution, a 350% increase in approximately 60 years. And China is on track to create a 700% increase in per capita income in 20 years. So the speed at which forms of capitalism are supplanting each other has now become light speed compared to the historical world that we're used to. That makes a big difference to us because it means that within our own lifetimes, we can see a major shift in the capitalist Cold War towards nations that are not necessarily democratically elected. Imagine when American corporations become so big in China that they are 10 times the size of their operations in the United States. Who will they represent in front of Congress? Whose interest will they represent? Who will tell them what they have to represent? Otherwise, they will lose 90% of their business in the world, because most of it will be in China. Today, we think in the automobile industry that if we make 150,000 units of a car, that's a big deal in the US, and that's a major hit. In the future in China, 150,000 units of a car will not satisfy the demand of even one of their megacities and statistical population areas around that city, which will contain, in some places in cities that we don't even recognize, are going to be have 250 million people in them. So each one of their major cities will become and is the size of the United States. Today, the middle class in China is already larger than the entire population of the United States if you adjust for purchasing power parity, because things are much cheaper in China than they are in the United States. And when the power of that middle class begins to show itself, we will see a number of changes in the world in which we are all going to be working for the Chinese. And that is not to mention the fact that the Chinese have loaned us so much money in the last decade that they essentially own 11% of our debt. Now, I don't know if you realize what that means. It sounds like paper money to me when people talk about that. It sounds like, well, who cares how much we owe to a foreign country? But historically, there's been two ways in which debts are collected over time when countries default. And the first example is what I'd like to talk about is with Mexico. During their revolution against Spain, they borrowed millions and millions of dollars from France, which was very happy to provide the cash to undermine one of its key rivals in Europe. About 15 to 20 years after the Mexican Revolution, there was a default. And you may not realize this, but the way the French decided to collect their money was to invade Mexico and establish Emperor Maximilian, who acted as trustee of the nation on behalf of the debtors, or rather the lenders in France. He milked the country for what he could get to get the money back, and then disappeared in another revolution after he milked it too badly. So that's the first way we solve problems like that. Thank God, in the modern world, that's not the way we collect debts. The way we collect debts today, when somebody can't pay, is usually through a significant crisis, which leads other countries to have to refinance that country. So think of Greece, think of the International Monetary Fund with third world nations refinancing them, and in the process, the new lenders who refinance the debt determine the domestic policy of the country. It was once considered normal to have 30% of your GDP as debt and acceptable. With the debt that we are accumulating this year of $1.5 trillion, and I mean the word trillion, dollars for 2011, we will now have debt equal to the size of our economy. And if that continues into the future as we are expecting it to, it will very quickly become twice the size of our economy. The national budget will be dedicated to only two things: a small military and paying the interest and principal on our national debts. There will be no money for any of the alphabet soups that you have come to know and expect and rely on: the FBI, the SEC, OSHA, NASA, you name it, it's gone. And that's predicted to happen by 2020 by the Congressional Budget Office. So for those of you who are still thinking that it's the old world, that we are the richest nation on earth, that if we can put a man on the moon, we can do anything we want, and that we are the leader of the free world, you are living in an American dream. Not a good one, but a nightmare. And a different expectation has to take place. And yet Washington and most of the people in this country are not dealing with that. We are weakening ourselves with respect to the global world, and we are making ourselves vulnerable to being dictated to by foreign nations. A complete subversion of our democracy will take place within my lifetime unless we get our act together. And what I'd like to give you is a kind of example of the capitalist Cold War that's gone on so you can understand what happened. Post-World War II, we had engaged in a type of traditional American capitalism. This was set up by FDR. Lots of government transfers. We had to the elderly and to the poor. It was increased by LBJ and now by President Obama. In some ways, he's a throwback to that time period. We had trade barriers. We had national oligopolies that didn't serve the public well. Think of steel in Pittsburgh, automobiles in Detroit. Think about the regulation of oligopolies that kept prices high in airlines and so forth, other kinds of transportation. We were very conservative about balancing our budget, and we only used monetary policy to fight inflation. So the Fed's role was to keep inflation from getting out of control. About 1980, the Japanese arrived with a different kind of capitalism, formed around zaibatsus and keiretsus, which were not managed for the benefit of individual corporations. They were based on benefiting collectively the group of corporations that worked together. The country had industrial policy. It built national champions. It created one leader in shipbuilding, one leader in automobiles, and so forth, to launch and become export-oriented. They broke down the oligopolies in the United States by offering better quality and better prices than the oligopolies did with their planned obsolescence and their cars that were supposed to only last 3 or 4 years to force you to buy another one at the end of that time period. So the Japanese model of capitalism came on in a way that destroyed the post-war American capitalism. In addition to that, we then saw America respond with Reaganomics. This new form of capitalism was based on the idea of open trade. We will trade with everybody, and we will use the excuse that we should be able to get into Japanese markets, get into other markets all over the world to grow our economy. We will stimulate consumption through government fiscal policy, tax reductions, and through low interest rates and easy credit for everyone. We had no industrial policy. We let markets decide where capital went. Wall Street gained the power of deciding which companies and which industries survived or failed, and who got jobs and who didn't in society. And now that was a form of capitalism which came about by destroying the Japanese form. The free markets gave more flexibility and more innovation than the zaibatsu and keiretsu systems, which were complicated to manage and slow to change. And now, 1999 marks a new date. That's the date China entered the World Trade Organization. And since then, they have used protectionism of their home marketplace, cheap exports and slave labor, which undermines the standard of living that we have in the United States. They have used industrial policies to create industries, and they have stolen our intellectual property and our technological advantage. And today, we hear politicians talking about how innovation and education is going to solve our problems. But can we truly out-innovate 1.2 billion Chinese, another billion Indians in the world? Can we have more educated people than they have? It is an almost racist thought to think that the world is going to stay in our favor by simply educating people and so forth. In fact, the more we innovate in the United States, the more we create jobs overseas. The more we stimulate our economy, the more we create jobs overseas. Cash for clunkers. 1/2 of the money from that went to buy Japanese cars exported from Japan into the United States. The other half went to American cars, which were approximately 60% foreign content. Who did we stimulate with this great debt that we incurred and saddled our children with? So in the last minute and a half, I just want to suggest to you that laissez-faire capitalism is an end of an American dream. We are going to have a strategy to go forward, which means a more managed economy. We are not powerful enough to impose upon the world the American system of trade and open markets and so forth, like we were during the post-war period where the Japanese needed us and we could conform the Japanese attack on America, on Americans' economy, and the European form of capitalism's influence on the American economy. We imposed upon all of them American standards because they needed us for defense purposes. Today, the rules of the game are being shifted to the east, and if we don't start to think more about a strategic capitalism, then we will lose. And by a strategic capitalism, I mean many things that will challenge the fundamental values of the United States that go back to our roots. The need for an industrial policy and government investment in R&D has gone way up, but it does us no good if the benefits of that translates into foreign jobs. We simply must find a way to restrict American corporations and make American corporations think less about their shareholders and more about the people of the United States. Their loyalty will become more important than the global mindset we teach at business schools. And to finish this up, we're going to have to do things like withdraw from organizations that we created, like the World Trade Organization, because economic nationalism and the ability to negotiate with China, India, Japan, and so forth for access to their markets will become a critical success factor for our future. We need that strategy. We don't need the free market evolution that's taking place in a laissez-faire world. It has backed us into a corner in terms of who gets employed and how much profitability this country can make. We cannot simply migrate to a world of services. We are stuck with having to fight back in the new capitalist Cold War. And I hope that's something that you probably didn't realize was happening, but in your gut you knew it was happening. And I hope you realize that neither the Republicans nor the Democrats, with their laissez-faire economics and their social market economics, will solve our problem. It requires a radically different approach to capitalism. Thank you very much.